Okay, we're on. So when we do alliteration, you know, sometimes we only hear a word spoken, and then, you know, we don't know how to spell it because we just sort of go along with what it sounds like. But then sometimes if you only see a word written, you don't know how to pronounce it. Do you know what I mean? Like crazy names from the past that I still am not totally sure that I pronounce right. And that's why I have to look online to see Jan van Eyck, because. So what you're doing when you repeat the same sound at the beginning of a word is alliteration. And so a lot of my students have been labeling it ILL, alliteration. I just want to tell you it's alliteration because illiterate means you cannot read or write. It's not totally true because I'm reading your paper. I know you can read or write. So you're not illiterate. You're alliterating. Does that make sense? It struck me as funny. I see the IL, I'm like, you're not illiterate. You're not. Okay, go ahead and get your reading questions out. We'll talk about that later. We are going to talk about the Reformation today. And I was chatting before you guys came in. So this is difficult because, first of all, we may come from different faith traditions in this room, meaning that some of you think that this is all a good thing, and maybe some people think this is not a good thing, the Reformation, all right? Also, it's very hard when you grow up thinking about God or church services in a certain way, to think about them another way. It just seems like, well, this is the way you do it. This is the way everybody does it. And then when you find out, well, that's not the way everybody sees it, or that's not the way everybody does it, it's hard. And so the only way to understand what these people were arguing about, partly, is to talk about what they believed, okay? So let's try really hard. I know your gut reaction is going to be, if you feel this way, well, that's just wrong. Well, that's not right. That's not what the Bible says. But let's just try to step back and say, but what if I read those verses in a different way? Because all the people we're talking about, let's make this blanket statement, all the people we're about to talk about love Jesus. And they all believe they're serving him best by what they're doing. On both sides. The Catholic side and the Protestant side, they all love Jesus. So they all are people who, are we all familiar with the Nicene Creed? Do you know what I mean when I say that? A lot of churches recite the Nicene Creed. It's a statement of what we believe. It says, God created everything, Jesus is fully God, he's the same essence with the Father, we believe in the Holy Spirit, that Jesus will come back again, Jesus was born of a virgin, that he really died, he really came back alive, these things. These people all believe that, okay? So, but it's hard because it's hard to think outside of what we normally do when we worship God. Does that make sense? So we'll try, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask, well, what does that mean? Why are they doing that? Why would they think that? That's totally fine to ask, okay? But yesterday we got into a little bit of a kind of argument about it, and I just want to nip that. So let's start out with what was happening that made, by the way, before we even go there, hang on. What do we, let's just think about this word, Reformation. Do you see formation in that? Making something, shaping something. And then do you guys know what whenever we see at the beginning of a word, like if I told you to redo something, what do I want you to do? Do it again. Do it again. Retry. All right, do it again. So we're going to form it again in in the eyes of the reformers, in the way it used to be at the very beginning, before what they saw as a bunch of junk got loaded onto beliefs and practices. We're going to form it again and go back to the beginning. Does that make sense? That's why we call it the Reformation. So what sort of things were happening in the church that made people rise up and say, we need to shape this again, form this? Give me one of them, Lauren. Okay, in what way? Okay, so remember, just so everybody here, Lauren said the church basically was fulfilling government functions. They were in charge, they were telling people what to do. So remember what we've been talking about for a few weeks. During this time, think back in Robin Hood time, medieval times before that. We have the feudal system, right? We have lords, and then they have their peasants on their land, and the lords can all get together and say to the king, yeah, we don't think we're going to do that. We're going to do whatever we want. But things are changing in Europe. You know, the Black Death killed off so many people, and it changed things, and peasants left the land. And now we have actual countries. People who are thinking of themselves not as, I belong to this feudal lord, but I am a resident of France. I am a resident of England. I am a resident of Austria, you know. And so when you do that and you have a king, it's patriotic, right? Yay for my country. And we don't want the Pope. We don't want someone from outside of our country coming in and telling us what to do. Does that make sense? In fact, that's why, you know, early America, Catholics were very persecuted. Maryland was set up as sort of a haven for the Catholics. People hated them, partly because mostly it was Protestants that settled America, but partly because they saw them as having an allegiance to someone else. Do you know what I mean? They might turn on our government because they'll obey the Pope. And so they were worried about it. Okay, so that's one thing. We don't like church government being in control of our newly formed national government. Did anybody put something else that was going on? Yeah. Yes. Clergy, that's fine. That's one of those things if you only read it and you don't hear it. Yes. That's exactly right. Remember Erasmus, who collated, he didn't translate, he put together the different manuscripts to put together a Greek New Testament from all the existing manuscripts that he could find, to put it together so scholars could use it. Erasmus was writing critical things about the church. We talked about that in Praise of Folly, how he made fun of the churchmen, the monks and the priests and the bishops. What about their lives were many people making fun of or poking fun of? What were the priests and the monks, how were they living that people didn't like? You can kind of think of Canterbury Tales too, that prologue where Chaucer said there was a monk, but he would spend all his time hunting. Remember that it sounded like he'd be more comfortable out hunting than at the sickbed of some dying person. How were they living? They were living in luxury. Remember Robin Hood. Think of this. Robin Hood is great for this. You know, the bishop that was going to steal Richard of the Lee's lands, basically. I mean, he lent him money, but he was charging him interest, and there was no way he was stealing it, basically. He could have had mercy and said, no, I will relieve you of the debt, release you completely of the debt. He didn't. Think of those two monks that Little John, remember Little John went out one day, he and Robin Hood were going to find adventure, you know, and he found these two monks, and they made fun of Little John. They didn't want him near, they didn't want to associate with low life. The story where he he was worried they didn't have enough money. So they prayed, they got down in the road and prayed to St. Dunstan to give them money. Little John knew they were hiding money. That's what they had become. And people didn't like it, and it wasn't what they were supposed to have become. And people started rising up and crying out against that. And like Adeline said, people complained about this, but then it's one thing. I mean, Chaucer was fairly well known even in his lifetime. But when you can print their books and print thousands of them and distribute them, the word gets out really fast. But did anyone put anything else? I'm going to browse through here and see if there's, I highlighted this too. The examples of the popes living in luxury naturally affected the bishops, and to build their palaces and churches, and to pay for their works of art, and to maintain their courts of luxury, all Christendom was taxed. You had to pay taxes. And remember, the taxes you're paying are going out of your country. In general, we pay taxes, right? Tax season is around the corner. You probably hear your parents talking about it or getting their taxes ready. But in general, we know that our taxes, the money I spend, a lot of it pays for the policeman, it pays for the fireman. Some of my tax money goes to my library, my property taxes. We pay so that we can have courts and judges and prisons and the things we need to run as a society. Those were kind of negative examples, weren't they? Courts, judges, and schools, streets, maintenance of bridges. I don't want bridges to fall down. So I pay the money and I think, yes, but that I benefit from that. But when these people sent taxes to Rome, so somebody could build palaces or buy works of art, they don't really benefit from that. So people got very annoyed. It started out with annoyed, all right? Not vehemently angry, annoyed. Yes, Rhett? You know what? I think they have a right to be annoyed too. Matthias? Yes, but then the government uses it for those things. So like policemen and firemen get paid by the government, and schools get paid by the government, and the public libraries get supported by the government, so. But you know what, Matthias? The government does a lot of goofy stuff with my money too. And so I get annoyed. Sometimes I get annoyed. Yes. But, so let's look at what happened in 1517. All right. There had been guys before. We talked about Wycliffe in England, who was speaking out against what he considered abuses in the church in England. That most of these voices got silenced. They got silenced because they couldn't print their writings and distribute them widely, or the government just came down on them and squished them. All right, no, we're not going to do that. But things were different in 1517. So the next question I asked you is, what doctrine or practice was Martin Luther complaining about in 1517, Lauren? Indulgences. Let's talk about who Martin Luther is for a minute, and then I will tell you what an indulgence is. So Martin Luther was going to be a lawyer, and Dorothy Mills told you part of his story. His dad, he was a very intelligent man, and he had a great career in front of him, but he was traveling and he got caught in a thunderstorm, and he was terrified. And he said, Lord, if you save me, I will become a monk. Which people used to do. Sometimes people today, in movies, you'll see people in a bad situation making deals with God. God, if you just get me out of this, I will, whatever. This is what Martin Luther did. Well, he made it through. So, ticking his father off very much, he became a monk. But he was very studious, and so he became a monk professor. He was a teacher at the University of Wittenberg in Germany, but he was also a monk. And Martin Luther had a spiritual problem And this was his problem. He just couldn't believe that God forgave him. He had trouble believing God loved him and God would forgive him. And so he spent a lot of time trying to do things so that God would forgive him and love him. Now, a lot of people think that, well, that's because that's what the Catholic Church teaches. Actually, he had a spiritual advisor who told him to knock it off. His spiritual advisor in the monastery said, you need to let it go. God forgives you. God loves you. But he couldn't let it go. Anyway, so this is brewing in him, you know? And so they were rebuilding. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Rhett. Before yeah, and Gawain wouldn't let it go. That's very good, Rhett. Yes. Martin Luther also couldn't let it go. The fact that he's a sinner. So they were rebuilding and expanding St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and they needed money. So, you know, they already tax people, but they need more money in Rome. So they sent guys out to sell what are known as indulgences. Now, this is going to be the head exploding part, but if I don't explain it, then you'll leave saying, what the heck's an indulgence? So I will tell you. So in Catholic theology, when we sin, God, and you confess your sin, and you tell God you're sorry, he forgives you, okay? But that doesn't mean that there aren't effects of your sin. And so example, like if I shoot someone, God can forgive me. I believe that God can forgive a murderer if they truly repent and they are very sorry. But that doesn't mean I might not spend the rest of my life in prison. Right? God doesn't say, I forgive you, now I will let you out of prison and get you off all charges. I still have to pay the price. Does that make sense? Okay. So the idea is that when we sin, we've done something to ourselves and there's a certain price to pay. And for most Protestants, the idea is that the moment you die, you're just perfect suddenly. You're just like, you took your last breath and you weren't perfect, and then you die and you're perfect, and you're ready to be in God's presence. But the Catholic idea is that you're not perfect the moment you die, but you might need a little cleaning up, all right? You might have to live out some of those effects of your sin because they're not quite lived out. And they have a place for that, and that place is called purgatory. Purgatory is not hell. And purgatory is, nobody goes from purgatory to hell. These people are all saved. They're all on their way to heaven. C.S. Lewis was not Catholic, but he said, I kind of like the idea of purgatory. He said, you know what, if I traveled to see an earthly king, and I was trudging through the mud and everything, and I'm all filthy, I might say, please, can I wash up before I go to see the king? Can I wash up? And so C.S. Lewis used to call it the washroom. Purgatory was like God's washroom. Clean you up, get you ready to be in the presence of holiness. I'm not asking you to agree, you know, I'm just, this is the idea. Indulgences were to release you from part of that punishment. It doesn't mean it's not a ticket out of hell. It releases you from some of that purgatorial punishment. It cleans you up a little bit here, all right? Like washes your face a little bit. That's the idea. But the idea was always that it's no good if you're not sorry for your sin. You can't just go, you know, rob banks and then say, give me an indulgence. Okay, I'm good. I'm not sorry I robbed the banks. It didn't work like that. It was, you go and you say, I did this. I am sorry. God forgive me. And then, okay, then for certain acts. So if you went on a pilgrimage, you could get an indulgence. If you prayed a certain amount of times, if you gave money, all right, you could get an indulgence. It would counterbalance the effects of your sin. This guy, his name was Tetzel. I like his name. It's fun to say. Tetzel. He was coming around. He was promising people, if you give me money, I will give you an indulgence, and I really don't care whether you're sorry or not. This is not what the church teaches. And Martin Luther heard about this guy. He's like, that's bosh. And Martin Luther was right. Even as far as the Catholic Church goes, that was bosh. It doesn't work that way. Tetzel was passing money on to Rome, but he was also putting some in his own pocket. And Martin Luther didn't like it. And he went to his local, the nobleman, the lord that was over his district. And he said, this Tetzel guy is full of baloney. No, he can't preach that. But Martin Luther didn't know something. The Lord that he was complaining to was also putting money in his pocket for the indulgences. It's like going to the police and complaining about shoplifters in your area, and then finding out the shoplifters are giving some of the stuff to the police. All right, the police aren't going to stop them. So Martin Luther did what he thought was best. He did what university professors did. They would, if there was some issue they wanted publicly discussed, they would write it out, and they would take it to the church that was associated, was on the campus of the university, and nail it to the wall, and then everybody could walk by and see. And he wrote his about indulgences. This Tetzel guy is full of baloney. And by the way, while I'm thinking about this whole indulgence thing, I don't like it. If the Pope can do that, why doesn't he just release everybody from all their effects of their sin? Why does he hold some people accountable? And how can he do that for money? That's just wrong. So he wrote these out, but you know what? Pretty doggone fast, somebody's copying them down, and they're taking them to the local printer, and they're printing a bunch of them out, and they're passing them around, right? And he created a firestorm. But he only created a firestorm around where he was. Because remember what's going on. We've spent this whole semester so far talking about the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, and he's fighting Francis I in Italy, and he's losing Denmark, and then the Turks are invading, and they're fighting the Battle of Lepanto. This is all happening at the same time. He's busy. Charles V is busy. They've got bigger stuff to do, and the Pope said, yeah, he's just some jerk, low-life German monk. I don't care what he has to say. He should have cared. He should have cared. You know, they say that King George III, who was King of England during the American Revolution, that he has a journal. This may not be true, but I've heard this many, many times, and I'm pretty sure it's true. I'm like 95% sure it's true. That on July 4th, 1776, his entry is, nothing of importance happened today. Yeah, buddy, Declaration of Independence, you bet something important happened today. Nothing of importance happened. That's how the Pope feels. Nothing of importance happened. That guy, nobody's going to listen to him. Who listens to some German monk? People listen. People listened because maybe they didn't care about indulgences, but they cared about all that other stuff that we just talked about. Those blasted bishops in their palaces, and those taxes I'm tired of, and all the shenanigans that go on, and the corruption that goes on. We're sick of it. And it lit a fire. Yeah, Brett. Yes, I don't think at first they did, but when they read Martin Luther's attacks on it, because that was part of the theological framework of the church. But so they weren't so mad that they were of the concept of indulgences. But Martin Luther was first angry because they were paying for them. But then he started explaining, like, I don't even like the whole concept. I think we should just ditch the whole concept. And so, see, he starts out small. I don't like Tetzel. I don't like what he's saying. And then it just, or over some years, 4 or 5 years, gets bigger and bigger. I don't like the whole concept. And I don't like this concept either, or that concept. Does that make sense? So they, this is the next question I asked you. The Pope finally excommunicated him. You're out of the church, buddy. What did Luther do with the message? Yeah. He publicly burned it. That's what I think of the Pope's message. They called him to, let me see if I can find this part. They called him to, okay, this unfortunate thing called the diet of worms. Okay, a diet is a church meeting, and Worms is the name of the city. But when you read diet of worms, it's just very, very unfortunate. They brought him before, okay, no, it must be in this chapter. It is diet. It looks like that, diet of worms, yes. But a diet is a church meeting, and Worms is the city. Okay, she doesn't quote it. So he very famously said, oh, she said, here I stand, was brought before a church court, and they showed him his books, and they said, did you write this? Because at this point, it was several years in, and he had written books on these subjects. Yes, I wrote them. And then they went through and they showed him where he was wrong. Like, do you want to take it back? And he said, let me think about it overnight. So let him think about it overnight. And he came back, he's like, yeah, I don't want to take it back. He said, if you can show me from Scripture where I am wrong, I will take it back. But I don't think you can. And so here I stand, and I can do no other. Now, people had been burned at the stake for less than this before Luther. And Luther's friends were really nervous. I hope he makes it home. They promised him safety, but remember the king promised Robin Hood safety, in that episode towards the end of the book, and that didn't go very well. His friends were very, very nervous. Or maybe they'll let him get home and then they'll come nab him. So they kidnapped him. They just kidnapped him, his own friends. They grabbed him and they took him to a castle where he spent 18 months in seclusion. He actually dressed up like a tinker, somebody who sells pots and pans, and put on a fake beard and everything, and went out in public sometimes in disguise. And he spent his time in the castle translating the Bible into German. In his absence, though, people grabbed hold of his ideas, and they decided to expand on them, sometimes in ways that Martin Luther really wasn't appreciating when he came out of seclusion. One of the things, and I asked you this, what unexpected, unpleasant result did his teachings on equality have? Do you have it? You were waving your pen. Do you know? He taught that all men are equal. Do you think you know, Alice? I'm sorry. I see what. See, you guys, they stretch, and then I think, is it you? Is it you? I'll read it. Luther had preached the doctrine of the equality of all men in the sight of God. Peasants who had listened to his preaching, to his vivid, homely phrases, believed that he meant equality in social as well as spiritual things. Okay, it's one thing to say all men are created equal in the sight of God, and God loves you all equally because you are made in his image. It's another thing to say we should take other people's money and share it around and we should all be equal. Do you see the difference? It's another thing to say everybody is equally intelligent or equally competent. If you're choosing sides for a basketball team, you do not want to choose me. I'm not competent. I'm also short, but mostly I am just not competent. I am not equal to the people who are. right? There's ways in which we're definitely not equal. But these people heard, oh, all are equal, and they're not thinking in the sight of God. They're thinking, yeah, let's all be equal. There had been unrest among the peasants for a long time. They were heavily taxed. Enclosures were putting men out of work. Remember the sheep enclosures? Rents were high, and they resented the game laws. You know the rules like in Robin Hood, you can't shoot the king's deer. You can't shoot the Lord's pheasants. I don't care if you're starving to death. Tough. Up and down Germany, agitators were going about among the peasants, men who had nothing to lose, and perhaps a good deal to gain if an uprising of peasants were successful. Luther's teaching was seized upon by these men. The Bible was quoted to justify a revolt, and in 1525 the Peasants' War broke out. Luther came of peasant ancestry, and he had real sympathy with them, but he did not believe in an armed uprising. And so finally he wrote a pamphlet. This is the name of his pamphlet. Against the murdering, thieving hordes of peasants. It's a rousing title. I want to read that. Calling on the government authorities to suppress the revolt. Luther said, no, that's not what I meant. We can't have people marauding and killing and looting. No. You need to shoot them. Basically, he said, shoot, stab, and kill, or something like that. It was a rousing document, okay? What? They early, yes, by the 1500s, they have like muskets, but not very aimable. You know, it's kind of like spewing metal in your general direction and hoping some of it hits you. And some of it probably will. Or shoot arrows at them if you can't afford the muskets. So this is what happened. And this went on, and actually the church took 30 years to finally address this, because it was busy, you know, like Francis I from France is fighting in Italy, and they're worried about that, and all the Italian city-states are still fighting with each other, and then the Turks are coming. We've got problems bigger than Martin Luther. And they dealt with those other problems, and by the time they turned, this had spread. These ideas had spread to Switzerland, to Denmark, to France. Next week, well, we're not meeting next week, but 2 weeks from now, we're going to read the chapter about the Reformation in England, which will be kind of a review for you guys because it's Henry VIII again, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. So that was a little different case, right? Because he really just changed the church because he wanted a new wife, not so much because he didn't like the Catholic Church. But this idea had spread, and by then there was no putting it back. There was no setting the clock back. So that's what happened. That is Martin Luther. Before any questions or comments before we talk about the other two guys, Zwingli and Calvin, that I want to talk about today? Does it make sense? All right. Say what? Just of old age. He actually went on to, and Dorothy Mills tells you some of this, as he advocated changes in the church, he said we shouldn't have monks and nuns. We need to abolish monasteries. That's wrong. And of course, all the monks and nuns in the monasteries are now, in a sense, out of work, if you know what I mean. Like they've got to find a place in society. I'm not sure he really thought about this, but the nuns, and you ladies, it's kind of odd for us. It's only in the last, 100 years or so that women have had more, professional options if you don't marry. All right, if you married, your professional option is you've got children and they need a mother, you know. But other than that, you could be a nun, or you could be a governess. You could be a hired teacher that lives in someone's house. But a lot of women, if they chose not to marry, or they just didn't get married, became nuns. And Martin Luther said, no, we're not going to do that. He actually married an ex-nun. And I think they got to care for each other very, very well. But originally, It was just, there were X number of nuns that needed husbands, and her name's Katerina, and she's like, well, I'll take him. You know, they just kind of lined people up with, because what else was a woman going to do? She couldn't go get a job, and he couldn't just leave them to starve, so he married one of them. But they had a family, and he spent his life writing, and fighting with Erasmus, as we talked about before. But yeah, just lived out his life, and never really said, except for the Peasants' War, never really said that he was unhappy with the results of what he did. So that is the start of the Lutheran Church. So is anybody in here Lutheran? So that's the start of the Lutheran Church. Lutheran churches still have much of what we consider the liturgy. So the pastor wears vestments, like he wears special clothes during the church service and things like that. But people aren't going to be happy to stop there, because people are going to look at the Lutheran Church and say, that's not far enough. I don't like him wearing those clothes. I don't like you reading out of that prayer book. And it's going to go and go and go, and we're going to have group after group after group saying, that's not far enough. That's not far enough. Does that make sense? Well, and we'll talk about that more this semester. So that's Luther. In the neighboring country of Switzerland, there was a man named Zwingli. And Zwingli heard about what Martin Luther was doing, and he thought it was great. But Zwingli was a little more bloodthirsty than Luther. Zwingli just didn't see why we can't make everybody do this. Just fight them. Just go to war with them and make them do it. That seems like a good solution. It says, Dorothy Mills says this about him. He had much of the Old Testament type of warrior about him, and he wanted war to enforce his will. He tried to get an alliance with the churches in Germany, these new Lutheran churches. And here we're going to have another theology moment, okay? And that seems like a great idea, right? If we have a bunch of these reformed churches in Germany, let's all get together. Let's all band together. There's strength in numbers, and we can make our voices heard and make a real change. They could not get along. Zwingli and Luther could not get along because they deeply, deeply disagreed about something, and it was communion. So, in Catholic theology, when you go to church, the most important thing you do is take communion. The pastor may say some nice words about the scripture reading and everything, but the reason you're here is communion. It's the main event. And it is because this is truly Jesus. And this is it's very hard for the Protestant mind to wrap around this. Every time you go to Mass, there is a miracle performed. And the bread and wine turns into the body and blood of Jesus. It is not something that you can take to a lab and test it. It's not that kind of change, all right? If you take it to a lab and test it, it is bread and wine. But he is present there. And when he said, take, eat, this is my body, or when he said in John chapter 6, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. He said that in John chapter 6. For Catholics, they interpret that as, he's really there. I better watch it, because when I step up and put this in my mouth, I'm putting the Lord in my mouth. He's going to become a part of me, just like all the food I eat becomes a part of me. You know, and so there's rules about what you do with it. You can't just dump the wine after it's been blessed. It's not just wine anymore. Not just anybody can eat the bread, leftover bread. It's holy now. Okay, so Luther believed a form, there's a whole doctrine around this, and Luther believed closer to that. He believed in some fashion Jesus was really present there when you did this, all right? Zwingli, it's a memorial service. You just take a piece and you just remember Jesus. It's only a memorial service. There's nothing special about this bread and wine. There's nothing holy, particularly holy. And they fought and fought. We have transcripts of their meetings, and I mean, it's pretty like yelling match. I'm gonna break you on this point, and you're, oh, Zwingli and Luther, okay. They couldn't get along because they couldn't agree on what the words in the Bible meant. They both read the same John chapter 6. They both read the same account of the Last Supper, but they didn't agree with what it meant. So they couldn't get together. So Zwingli was on his own, basically, is the upshot of that. And Zwingli is like, yeah, grab some swords, and let's go make everybody reform the church. And so that's pretty much what he did. He said, be steadfast and be not afraid of war. Our object is to tame these upstart tyrants who rise against God and suppress his word. All right, so let's just grab a weapon, get a pitchfork, let's go. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. I think so. I think so. It says war did come. Zwingli went out with the army, but in 1531 at the Battle of Kappel, not only he but a number of other Protestant pastors were killed. I looked this up in another book and I wrote a note to myself. Luther is said to have commented that he got what he deserved when he heard that he got killed in war. Yeah. Got his, didn't he? All right. This is not a pretty story, unfortunately. Okay, so that's Zwingli. John Calvin is our last guy. What city was he in? What city is he associated with? Yeah, Simeon. Geneva. Geneva, Switzerland. I was blessed to be one night in Geneva, Switzerland, once upon a time, in 1984. On a tour, we were going through England and France, and we went over into Switzerland. It was very pretty. So John Calvin was French, and he'd been raised in the church, but he also had some problems with church theology and church practice. And a friend of his delivered some speeches that people think Calvin wrote, and they were very anti the Catholic Church, and they got him in big trouble, especially when people thought, I think John Calvin wrote that. And they went on the run. The Protestants in France were called Huguenots. You do not have to write this down, but sometimes it's nice to hear it and see it at the same time. It is not Latin. I have no idea what it means. I should find that out someday. It's like, why do they call them Huguenots? It must mean something. Sometimes there's an E in it here, I think. I may not have spelled it right. And the French Huguenots were persecuted. Death persecuted. All right. We're going to talk a little bit more over the next few weeks about what happens to you if you want to be on one side, but you're in a country that wants to be on the other side religiously. All right. We'll talk about some of the wars. But Calvin needed to get out of France because they'd kill him. So he's on the way, and Calvin just wanted to have his little library. You know, he's like me. I just want a cup of tea and a book. I want some nice pens and paper. I just want to sit and read and think, and everybody leave me alone. So he's traveling north, and he stops in Geneva. And the pastor of the Reformed Church in Geneva, because by then the Reformation had spread, came in and said, God wants you to stay here and help this church. God brought you here. And by golly, if you leave and you don't help us, God's going to punish you. It's like, oh, okay. I thought I was going to go farther north and just have my books and my tea, you know, and my simple life. He spent the rest of his life pastor in Geneva. But John Calvin wanted to do something more with Geneva than just fix the church. He wanted to completely reform the entire lives of the people. So he's going to put some rules in place. But let me hear from you gentlemen first. Yes, Matthias. They did not force him. They forced him with words. Words, which are pointed and sharper than swords sometimes. Yes, right. Oh. Oh. Did you just do a Google search? Can you put in Huguenot and then behind Huguenot put the word etymology? Oh, you got it? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, because you can't worship in the main church, right? Because you don't agree with them. And you can't build your own church because you're being persecuted and you're doing it underground. Not literally underground. You know what I mean, but hiddenly. Okay, thank you. Huguenots. Oh. We will talk in a few weeks about the terrible persecution of the Huguenots. But back to John Calvin. He decided he's going to fix everything. And so in Geneva, all luxury was forbidden. Public festivals were banned. No dancing was allowed at weddings. Feasts for too many people or on too lavish a scale were forbidden. Clothes might not be made of forbidden materials or fashion. No one might laugh at any sermon by Calvin or speak angrily of him in the street. These things were not only forbidden by law, but any infringement of them was punished with ruthless severity. All right? He is a tough guy. You didn't mess around in Calvin's Geneva. This is the beginning of the movement. And now look how different this is. Martin Luther was known, he liked a good beer and sat around the table with friends and talked theology and politics and everything. He liked a good feast. Calvin's like, no. This is the beginning of the idea of the Puritans, all right? And you probably know this term because they talk about the Puritans settling America, all right, the Pilgrims. They were actually separatists, and we'll get to that in a minute. They were like Puritans times 2, separatists were. They made very strict rules about what you could do. So, for instance, they would suppress plays. Interestingly, because we're about to read a Shakespeare play. There was a time when Puritans were in charge of England, and you couldn't put on plays. Like you couldn't stage a play. That was evil. Mostly it was because they thought wicked people hung out at plays, which might have been a fair. There's probably some heavy drinking, and it was like a football game. You know what I mean? Let's have some hot dogs and some beers, and then get a little tipsy and start throwing things. That's a Shakespeare play. All right, the Puritans were like, no, we shouldn't do that. All right, but it was very strict. So that was Calvin's Geneva. Calvin is famous for I think this will be our last kind of theology lesson of the morning. Calvinism. I don't have to write Calvinism on the board. That's easy to remember. So is anybody in here Presbyterian? Okay, so Presbyterians have kind of come away from this a little bit, but Presbyterians are the heirs of Calvinism, although Presbyterians do not go around today telling you can't have plays or wear only certain kinds of clothes. That's not a thing. But the teaching of Calvin, the primary teaching of Calvin is known as predestination. So predestination is talked about in the Bible, right? It says those he called, he predestined, that Jesus was slain from the foundation of the world. We know that God has a plan, right? But Calvin was a thinker, and he took logical steps, he felt like in his own mind, to come up with the idea that before any of us were born, God picked who was going to get saved and who was going to go to hell. And there's nothing you can do about it. And all you can do is hope that God will have mercy on you and that you're in the first category. But there are certain signs that you might be in the first category, and that would be love of God and devotion to God. So it's not useless to worship God and go to church, because it is, if you want to, it's a sign that he's probably chosen you. No. And they use, as to back this up, Calvin used episodes like Jacob and Esau, who were together in Rebekah's womb and jostling together. And Rebekah said, well, "What's up with my children?" And God sends her a message. Well, the younger will serve the elder. You know, 2 nations are in your womb. And he says, at one point, "Jacob have I loved, and Esau I have hated." And so Calvin, see, right there, like God loved Jacob and he hated Esau. And in Calvin's mind, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Esau went on to sell his birthright and marry pagan women, much to the grief of his parents. Didn't matter. This is a hard, harsh teaching. And for the Presbyterians, most Presbyterians do not believe this anymore. Right? You might hear tulip. Oh, I shouldn't bring this up because I'm not going to remember what they are. Are the total depravity, unlimited something, limited atonement. So Jesus only died for certain people. He only died for the chosen ones. Perseverance of the saints. I remember that one. I'm sorry I brought tulip up. But there's a nice acronym, you know, where you can remember the 5 points of Calvinism. But the most memorable one is that he believed some people were just chosen, and some people just weren't. And that's the way it is. The reason this, the reason this matters. Many people throughout Europe started sending pastors, sending people to Geneva to train under Calvin. And one of these people is a guy we're going to meet in a couple weeks, John Knox, who was from Scotland. And he took Calvin's ideas to Scotland, and they spread to England, and that's where those English Puritans came from, many of whom settled America. Does that make sense? This is a hard day. This is hard stuff to talk about. It's like, whoa, people actually believe that? Yeah, the people do. So do you have any questions? I'm going to just drop bombs on you. Like, talk to your parents too. I'm not here, I don't want to unsettle anyone. I'm just saying this is what they believed and this is what they were teaching. But the problem, I'll just say one more thing about that last one. The problem with predestination is nobody can live like it's true. I mean, it doesn't match with reality. We know that we make choices that matter, don't we? What if we can't make any choices that matter at all? Why would I even get out of bed in the morning? Nobody can live a life thinking that everything's been planned out already and none of your choices make any difference. Do you see how that would just be so depressing? You just couldn't live. And I feel like any philosophy, whether it's theology or other kind of philosophy, that you can't live a normal human life and believe at the same time, there's something wrong with that philosophy. Does that make sense? So that's why almost no one hardcore is a Calvinist anymore. There are people who are, so what I described to you is called double predestination. Double because some people are destined for heaven and some people are destined for hell. They try to modify a little bit and say some people are destined for heaven, but the other people, I don't know what they say about the other people. like they've got a choice, maybe, you know, that you can repent, you can do something about it, but there are people that are just chosen. So can you see that it did not take very long? Like Calvin is teaching maybe 30 years after Martin Luther nailed those statements to the door on the church. This spread really, really fast through these countries. So there was a hunger for change. There was a hunger to clean things up, to do it differently. But once you uncork, do you remember the Arabian Nights story where they let the genie out of the bottle, but then the genie wanted to kill him and you can't get the genie back in the bottle again? Like once you let something out, sometimes you can't stuff it back in. It's really hard. And it changes. I don't think Martin Luther would have liked what Calvin was doing in Geneva. And then we got another group called the Anabaptists. If there are any Baptists in here, the Baptists are, in a sense, descended from these people, but I'm not about to tell you that Baptists are crazy. But the Anabaptists were kind of over the edge. They're called Anabaptists. Ana, Greek means again. And so they baptized adults. All the people who had been baptized as children, they rebaptized them. And it's okay, you know, and they started out okay, but then a guy got in charge. His name was Thomas Munster, I think, and set up a city, and he called it New Jerusalem, and he said Jesus was coming back right away, and he took a bunch of wives, and things got really weird. And all the neighboring lords and officials surrounded the town and besieged them and took them all out because they were kind of out there. So within 100 years, we have all these offshoots, right? We don't just have Lutherans and Catholics. We've got Calvinists and Lutherans and people who follow Zwingli, and now we've got the Anabaptists, and we've got all these offshoot groups coming up, because once it got started, it just really didn't stop. Because say, you know, this whole side of the room is going to reform the church, but then we think it's gone far enough, but you guys don't. And you reform it more, but you two think it's gone far enough, and you two don't. So now you start your own church, but now you're arguing with each other, right? Matthias and Jesse are into it. Like, you're just wrong. I'm going to start my church, and I'm going to start my church. You see? And that's really what happened. Yeah. Probably, but I think, Rhett, probably it was more deep belief in these people. I don't think it was just, I think this could work, or I have an idea. They really, in their gut, in their heart, in their spirit, believed they were doing the right thing. And because I don't think they would have toyed with holy things and church things unless they really, really believed they were doing the right thing. They really believed what they thought was true. Yes? Causes division. And well, you know, that is a good question. We did for 1,000 years. Until 1053, there was one church. And that does not mean sometimes the people in the church did not agree with each other. But the difference was when they disagreed, they did not say, I'm going to go start my own church, because they did not believe it was possible. There is only one church. And so it's like a family. If you think, I don't like my family's a bunch of jerks. Hopefully none of you feel this way. But imagine if you did. You can't say, I'm going to go make myself a new family. Like, you just got to deal with the jerks you're with, right? You got to work it out somehow, because there's no other family. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to comment? Oh, well, if it's that your family are jerks, don't say that. Oh, okay. I'm teasing you, Bailey. Well, but I mean, no, we all start a new family when we get married. But you know what I mean? You can't alter the people you're related to. Well, and I yes, and that happens. But you know what? It's still your family, even if you leave it. Like even if I hadn't seen my parents in 20 years, they're still my parents. You know what I mean? And the church was like that in people's minds. You know, Jesus, the very last thing he prayed before he got arrested was, Lord, make them one as we are one. And the early church took this very seriously. This is why Paul wrote things like that. You know, are you baptized into Apollos? Were you, are you a follower of Cephas? Are you a Cephasite? I don't know what that would be. No. It's Christ. And so for 1,000 years, this was the most important thing. We've got to keep the unity. Because Jesus said, Paul said actually, you're the body of Christ. And you know, if you start lopping off pieces, first of all, the pieces you lop off don't do well. The rest of you also doesn't do well, depending on the piece you lop off. I actually wouldn't do well if you lopped off any piece of me. I might live, but I'm not going to be very happy. All right? And they really, really legitimately, literally believe this is a body, you can't lop pieces off. If you go out from us, you are not part of us anymore. You're outside Christianity. And then when the East and West split, this went on for another 500 years. And they could sort of maintain this. There were efforts at reunification, but it was just, for the West, it was just those people over there. Do you know what I mean? They didn't cross paths, really. It was like those people over in Constantinople, those people in Greece, they do their thing. They're the Orthodox Church, but we're the church, and we can't be breaking it up. If there's a problem, we got to deal with it like a problem in a family. We got to get together and say, let's hash this out. And actually, just a second, let me finish my thought. Actually, before Luther, about 10 years before Luther's Wittenberg door thing, in Rome, they started groups of people meeting to discuss reform of the church. They would call the Order of Divine Love. And we do not know, we will never know what would have happened if the Lutheran Reformation hadn't happened. Would the church still have changed, but changed from within, without the wars and the bloodshed and everything? We don't know. Only God knows. We don't know. What happened, happened. But there were people saying, you know what, we need to fix this. There's problems and we need to fix them, but we can't go make in our own church because there is no other church. Our only choice is to deal with the one we got. Yeah, Brett. When it first happened, no. Each side would say the other people have removed themselves from the true church. In the last 100 years, there have been movements to recognize that all people who believe, I talked about that Nicene Creed earlier, all people who believe that Jesus is the Son of God and he is fully God and he was born of a virgin and he came and he died for our sins and he rose again, these are all Christians. And so speaking for each of these, I think Orthodox would say these and Catholics would say this. Anybody outside of Orthodoxy or outside of Catholicism can be a Christian, but unfortunately they're not availing themselves fully of the Christian faith. There are things they're missing out on. But God still loves them and they're Christians. It's not, I mean, that would be the viewpoint. But there are things they're not partaking of that would be valuable for their Christian walk that they're deprived of because they're outside of us. Did I explain that? Does that make sense? Okay. But yeah, I mean, there's always been arguments. But for 1,000 years, they always managed to sit down together and say, okay, what this guy's teaching, that's outside the church. He's teaching Jesus isn't really God. No, we don't teach that. This is what we teach. And there were arguments, but they were able to settle them. And then we just got to the place where we weren't able to settle them and be one body. And so I will leave with this little preaching moment and say that, you know, all Christians, we ought to ask God to forgive us because we're separated from fellow Christians. You know, I don't think he likes that. If he gave his life and the last thing he said is make them one, as the Father and I are one, and then we're just okay with the fact that, you know, this group doesn't like this group. I mean, heavens, even within Protestantism, different denominations get into it with each other sometimes. And don't even get us started about how Protestants feel about Catholics, you know. And so it's not a nice thing. But we do it and we say what we say because we believe we're right. We believe that's what the Bible says. So, I don't know. Look on our fellow brothers and sisters of different Christian faith walks with mercy, I guess, and kindness and grace is the best thing you can do. And I'm not saying you have to agree with them, but just have. Isn't that what it's all about, right? We're supposed to love each other and have mercy, and if they're wrong, God will show them. Right? Does that make sense? What a hard lesson. All right, let me give you your next one. I said that we were going to read about England next time. I think that's true. Chapter 14. So you know we're not meeting next week. So I want to spend the rest of our time talking about King Arthur, because poor King Arthur has really gotten the shaft, I feel like. We just need time. Now we have a whole half hour for him. But while I pass these out, I want to talk about what else you're going to read over break. You are going to read Shakespeare's Macbeth. I see, what did I just say about loving and kindness, and then they just rip papers out of each other's hands. Don't listen at all. We are going to read Macbeth. Macbeth, have any of you ever read a Shakespeare play before? What? Okay, awesome. Awesome. Then a wonderful experience awaits you. So William Shakespeare was writing and lived under Queen Elizabeth, Henry VIII's daughter, the last one standing after, you know, Edward died and Bloody Mary died, and then Elizabeth got to be queen for 40 some years. And Shakespeare is one of many brilliant writers that lived in, they call it the Elizabethan age because Elizabeth was queen. But Shakespeare is the one most of us know the best. He wrote, 30 plus plays. Some of his plays tell English history. Some of his plays are comedies, which does not mean, ha, I laughed till I couldn't catch my breath. It's more happy ending plays, right? So when they have a happy ending, there can be problems along the way, you know, it's a little rocky road, but then everybody gets happy at the end and they all get married or you know, have a party. That's a comedy. And tragedies. Tragedies are the opposite. At the end of a Shakespeare play, if everybody is dancing, it's a comedy, and if everybody is dead on the stage, it's tragedy. That's how you know. There are sometimes a lot of people dead on the stage. But a tragedy, in Shakespearean terms, isn't just a sad story. I'm so sorry that happened to him. This goes back to something Aristotle wrote, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, that tragedy was the story of someone who made a mistake, made an error. And it came to be someone with a character flaw, all right? Somebody whose life goes bad because of something about them. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I think Macbeth's character flaw is that makes him go bad. You think about that. What's up with this guy? What's wrong with Macbeth? I've given it away. It is a tragedy. It's not a comedy. There will be no partying at the end. Of Shakespeare tragedies? Or, okay. Well, here's what I've done to try to make it easier. I sat down a couple weeks ago in my library at home and I read Macbeth out loud onto my camera. And I posted it on the YouTube channel. I just read it, but I stopped. I didn't explain everything because that would just be tiresome. But I stopped and said, so this is what was going on in this scene. This is who we're meeting. Or if they said something stunningly important, I might have said, listen to what he's saying here. This is really important, okay? And the longest, I did each act. Shakespeare plays come in 5 acts, okay? Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5. And so I did each act separately, all right? So if you want to, you don't have to. If you want to have help, you can get your Macbeth book and go to YouTube and sit down and I will read it to you and you can read along. And then I will stop and say, well, this is what's happening, or did you notice this is like what he said here, okay? And the longest one is 40 minutes. So you're not signing up for more. I mean, you could stop it in the middle of the video too. You don't have to watch the whole thing. But I did each one in the longest, they go from 25 to 40 minutes, each of the videos, yes. We're reading the whole, yes, the whole thing. I was gonna have you just do the first 3 acts, but then I thought, but we have 2 weeks. Let's just read the whole thing, then we can talk about the whole thing as a unit. So if you want to just get your book and read it to yourself, it's totally fine. But if you've never read Shakespeare before, English 400 years ago was a little different. And you're not going to understand every single thing they're talking about, but you will get the gist of it. But I thought my reading it and explaining a few touchy parts might help. So I just encourage you, if you would like a little help, to just get your book and turn on YouTube and read. There are scenes within the act, but I did the whole act together. But if you're short of time, like I have time for 2 scenes, just stop the video and go back to it later. It's all there. They are already posted on my YouTube channel, and parents have gotten an email with a link to the page, just in case people have lost the link, okay? So that's available to you. Yes, read the whole play. Macbeth was an actual Scottish lord. But in the real story, I'm not going to tell you what happens in the play, because I don't want to ruin it. But in the real story of Macbeth, the real deal, the king was named Duncan, and King Duncan was kind of a jerk king, to say that. And now so they got rid of him. Like, I'm sounding like, if your king's a jerk, just get rid of him. I do not approve of that. But I'm saying it was understandable. It was a political uprising. They rose up against King Duncan and removed him from office because he was an unworthy king. That is not what's going to happen in the play. I'll just warn you. Yes, Matthias. I'm not familiar. So many things I should read, Matthias. Crown and Covenant. And the author is? Charles Dickens? The Crown and the Covenant? I'm not even familiar with this. But you know what I did? The Molding Library was selling books a couple of years ago, and I bought the entire set of the complete works of Dickens, 39 volumes. So I bet it's in there somewhere, in the More Stories or something like that. Okay. But this is not the Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens? Okay, the Crown and the Covenant series. Okay, I'll look into it. Thank you. I always love a good recommendation. So that's not what's going to happen in the play. All right. So are we good? So the first thing you're going to do is read chapter 14 of Dorothy Mills, and then you're going to read Macbeth. And you know what? Let's talk about your paper, because so that we can just have open-ended time for King Arthur. So last week we had a bit of a discussion about the fact that knights are sort of like police and firemen and the military. And I got to thinking about this. I was troubled by this. And I thought, oh, shoot, they're right. I don't think I like this topic anymore. So I'm actually going to give you a choice. All right, I'm going to alter, because we can do that, right? We can change the assignment if we don't like the original assignment. We're going to alter it. And you remember, originally I asked you, would it be a good thing to have knights and knighthood today? And I asked you to brainstorm that. And now you're going to say, oh, she asked me to brainstorm. She's not even going to ask me my... No, I'm not going to ask you. We're not going to share our ideas. But they're still going to come in handy, okay? Because get a piece of paper, because I would like you to write this down. This is important. This is what we're going to do instead. Two choices. It's still going to be 5 paragraphs, right? And by now, you probably know that this is going to be an introduction, and you're going to do all your introduction things, right? You're going to catch my attention. You're going to tell me what this paper is about. You're going to give me any backstory I need, like maybe tell me what a knight is. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I've never read anything. I grew up in a closet. I'd never heard of knight. Tell me what a knight is. Okay, yes, I'm Harry Potter. And then in the conclusion, you're also going to sort of remind me of what your main points were and tell me why you think this matters. All right? So that's the same as we always do. And then we have 3 paragraphs in the middle that are the body, like they're the meat to our sandwich. We got the bread slices, and this is the meat and the cheese. And I had asked you, choice 1, should we have knighthood today? You can still write this paper. And you can have 3 reasons why you should or shouldn't have knighthood today. And then you can explain each of those reasons why you feel that way. Does that make sense to everybody? But if you are troubled by the fact that you feel like, but we do have knighthood today, it's called the police and the military, you have another option. This is option number 2. You can, I need my glasses, compare knights to police and the military. How do I do that? I say, oh, here's one way they're the same. Here's another way they're the same. Here's a way they're different. Yes, Rhett? Yes, they don't have to be on horses and armor, okay, okay. But they still have the same code. They still have the same, oh, you mean for the comparing? Oh, no, what? You know what, if you do that one, you can use the fact that they have modern equipment versus not modern equipment. That would be okay. Here's some ways that you can compare them. All right, here's a list of ways. All right, I'm going to write them over here just so people can see better. Out and then back. Yes, Rhett. Yeah, we'll have each country have their own notes. So here's some ways you can compare them. You can compare their function. What do they do? Do they both do the same thing or do they do different things? You could compare their training. How do you get to become a knight versus how do you get to become a policeman or be a member of the military? You could compare their I call this fellowship or group feeling. You know, so like the Knights of the Round Table, they had a certain, I don't know what to call it, but camaraderie. You know, like we're the Knights of the Round Table. We're a group. We're a special group, and those people are not knights, but we're knights, and we help each other, although sometimes we just randomly joust with each other when we meet each other. And you probably see where I'm going with this. Members of the military or police also have a camaraderie. You can compare their code of honor. You could also compare the background of the individuals. In other words, can anybody become a knight? Like, do you have to be born noble? Can anybody become a member of the military or a policeman, or do you have to be born of a certain social class? Now, you're not going to do all of these. Don't do all of these. That's too much. You need to pick 3 of them, right? So I might have a paragraph saying, this is what knights did. The police and knights are similar in their function. They both maintained order in society and enforced the right. But then you might see somewhere where they differ in their function, and you could talk about that. Does that make sense to everybody? Then in the next paragraph, I might say that knights had a code of honor, that they treated women a certain way, and you know, and the police and the military also have a certain code of honor, and you can be fired from the police or drummed out of the military or court-martialed if you don't follow it. So I'm not like, are we good? Do we understand? All right. Don't do both of these. You're choosing. I'm going to answer this question, or I'm going to answer this. Yes, Adeline. For the regular one? Yes, I think I know what you're saying. So if you're doing this one, and let me make sure I know what your question is. If you're doing this one and you're saying, no, we shouldn't because, I'll just use your example, because medieval knights would be ill-equipped for modern society, for modern warfare. And then, yes, then give me sub-reasons. Give me explanatory reasons why. Well, because we have AK-47s and they can shoot through armor, and you know, horses can run fast, but I think a police car can run faster than a horse, or you know, just various reasons. But that's exactly what you do. And then in this paragraph, you'd have another reason, reason number 2. And then you'd have some support. And then you'd have reason number 3. And then you'd support it. Was that your question? Okay, yes, Rhett. Yes, this version would be like your winter paper. Thank you, yes. This version would be a little different, but it's still the same format. You've got your sandwich, you know, you've got your bread, and then you've got 3, you know, you've got your salami and your, I don't know, your ham and your Swiss cheese. Whatever you like on your sandwich. Okay. I don't know. They put everything on a club, right? But does everybody feel okay about this? We are going to do both kinds of parallelism, right? And a strong verb, and a simile, and we are not illiterate, but we are going to alliterate. You're doing this all over the break. You have 2 weeks. Okay? And I'm actually canceling my classes next week because I'm traveling to Georgia. My son, may I erase this? Yeah. Okay. My son is graduating from officers training school in Georgia. And so I am driving to Georgia to see him. And so I will not be home for part of next week. But if you start working on this and you aren't sure about anything, there's no question too small. Please just email me or call me. Your mom has my contact information. I am very, very happy to answer your question, okay? Don't fret. Never go home and fret. I don't know if I'm doing this right. Just ask. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Yes, Rhett. Next time you see me, you should give me a paper, and you should have read Macbeth. We good? All right, let's talk about, oh boy, poor King Arthur. I just feel like King Arthur got the shaft. Why? I made up these questions and now I can't remember how I phrased them. Okay, why do you think all these knights need to be tested? Did you notice how much testing there was? They go into a castle and then the maidens always ply them with food and drink and comfy couches and, you know, and wink wink and a kiss or two or whatever, and they're always pretty. And the knight's like, no, I will resist. And then the castle just disappears. This happens more than once, or the tent just disappears. Why do they need to be tested to see if they're really as morally good as they say they are, or they seem to be? Why do you think? We do not want frauds. Also, we can't have frauds touching the Holy Grail, can we? Right? We can't have, not even frauds, but anybody stained, you know. Have you ever noticed that it's easy to make good decisions when everything is good, right? It's easy to say certain things are wrong if you're not around them. Does that make sense? But when you're around them and actually tempted to do them, then you find out if you really think it's wrong. You find out, can I say no? Does that make sense? It just, unfortunately, it just isn't good enough to say, okay, here's an extreme example. I, and nobody in this room probably, will ever have to make a decision between denying Jesus and getting killed. It may happen. I hope that I would not deny Jesus. But you kind of don't know until it happens. Do you know what I mean? That's why it's so easy to condemn other people. I can't believe they did that. Well, what about when it's you? So I am pure, and I don't, you know, I have one lady love, and I don't mess around with the other ladies, and I'm eating bread and water, and I'm being very disciplined. That's easy when you're out camping by yourself. But when you go to the palace, and the feast is spread out, and everything's beautiful, like, oh, now it's hard. I don't know why it is about us, but you just don't know until you get tested, right? So each of these knights got tested towards the end of the book, didn't they? They got tested to find out, are they the real deal? What are you really made of? Other thing. Anybody have another comment about that? How did King Arthur's kingdom fall apart? Why? I mean, at the end of the book, he's not dead, is he? He's whisked away to Avalon to come back again when England has need of him. But it's not good. The situation is not good. What brought it down? Was it the Saxons? What do you think, Alice? His knights brought it down. Lancelot couldn't give up on Guinevere. And Mordred, right? Morgana Le Fay's son, who hatched plots. It got torn apart from inside. They didn't get attacked from outside. There weren't invaders that came and took out King Arthur's kingdom. It fell apart from the inside. Do you think that happens in the real world? Do you think things fall apart from the inside? I'm afraid sometimes they do. You probably know something about the Roman Empire. And a lot of people argue, yeah, it got attacked from the outside, but it was already rotten on the inside. Things fall apart from the inside. It's very sad. Were you surprised to find, so at the very end, Arthur is wounded, and he's going to go be cured of his wounds in Avalon. And there were 3 ladies. There was, the Lady of the Lake and the Lady Nimue. Do you remember the 3rd lady? If you don't, can you guess? She's going to go take Arthur to Avalon and cure him of his wounds. Do you remember? That's the wrong book. It's kind of a shocker. All right, gotta find it. I got all these flags, but I didn't mark this. Oh, man, hang on. Okay, okay, the barge moved out. Among them was Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, and the Lady of the Isle of Avalon was also there, and Queen Morgana Le Fay, Arthur's sister. And a sad low cry rose from them when they saw King Arthur. They laid him down with his head resting in the lap of the Lady of the Isle of Avalon. And then Queen Morgana Le Fay, who knelt at his feet, wept softly and said, "Ah, my dear brother, why have you tarried so long from us? Alas, the wound in your head has caught over much cold." What happened to Morgana Le Fay? Wasn't she evil? Didn't she spend half this book trying to bring him down? How many we have been bewitched by Morgana Le Fay to cause trouble for King Arthur. I mean, I'm not looking for a particular answer. I mean, what do you think? Why is she here? What must have happened? Right, we're just going to leave it unanswered because I got no answer either. Apparently repentance of some sort. Maybe. Her son is now dead too. Mordred, her son, just died on the field at the Battle of Camlan. I think this is my favorite part of this whole book. I'm going to read it to you. Galahad and this new knight, Sir Melius, are riding, and they meet a pilgrim who says, "Sirs, you must choose now which road you will take. He who goes to the right comes easily to his journey's end, but by no prowess of his own. But he who rides down the left-hand road must win through, if he can, by showing his own strength and prowess." And of course, Sir Galahad, the good Sir Galahad, is very humble. Like, I'll take the easy road through no prowess of my own. I don't need glory. It's all God's glory anyway. But poor Sir Melius, I'm going to take the tough road. I'm going to show what I'm made of. He has all sorts of trouble. Gets knocked off his horse. Gets almost beaten within an inch of his life. Excuse me. And then you find out the roads join back up again. It's the same road. It was just another test. What time do you need to be at your next thing? Try to decide if I want to do this. Is it 10:15 or 10:20? No, that you need to be in your next place? Oh, you need to be in your next place at 10:15? Okay, then I should let you go. I brought a poem to read that was based on King Arthur. It's kind of a long poem. I'll go through as fast as I can. Okay. All right. So, okay, I gotta find a place. Oh, now I feel the pressure. You remember the Lady Elaine who magicked herself to look like Guinevere so she could have Lancelot? It says, the old tales tell, however, of another Elaine who loved Lancelot and from whom he rode away, refusing her love by reason of the faith unfaithful that kept him falsely true to Guinevere. This Elaine pined away when Lancelot left her and died of a broken heart, and when she was dead, her attendants laid her, richly clad, in a barge on the broad river that flows down to Camelot, and they placed a letter in her hand and let the barge drift with the stream, for such had been her dying wish. And then it tells how the knights and ladies all come down to see this beautiful dead lady laid in the barge because she died of a broken heart for Lancelot. So, hundreds of years later, in the 1800s, a fabulous English poet, they're like, oh, that's nice, Alfred Lord Tennyson, wrote a poem called The Lady of Shalott. And I'm going to read it. This is the picture that goes with the Lady of Shalott. And you can look at the picture, but listen to the poem. In this poem, the Lady of Shalott is apparently magicked, and she is made to stay in a tower where she can't really look out the window, or that's her doom, but she sees things happen in a mirror. You know the poem, don't you? Okay, I actually can't hold that and read at the same time. On either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye that clothe the world and meet the sky. And through the field the road runs by to many-towered Camelot. And up and down the people go, gazing where the lilies blow, round an island there below, the island of Shalott. Willows whiten, aspens quiver, little breezes dusk and shiver through the wave that runs forever by the island in the river flowing down to Camelot. 4 gray walls and 4 gray towers overlook a space of flowers, and the silent isle embowers the Lady of Shalott. By the margin willow veiled slide the heavy barges trailed by slow horses, and unhailed the shallop flitteth silken sailed, skimming down to Camelot. But who hath seen her wave her hand, or at the casement seen her stand, or is she known in all the land, the Lady of Shalott? Only reapers reaping early and among the bearded barley hear the song that echoes cheerily from the river winding clearly down to towered Camelot. And by the moon the reaper weary, piling sheaves in uplands airy, listening whispers, "'Tis the fairy Lady of Shalott." There she weaves by night and day a magic web with colors gay. She has heard a whisper say a curse is on her if she stay, a curse to look down at Camelot. She knows not what the curse may be, and so she weaveth steadily, and little other care hath she, the Lady of Shalott. And moving through a mirror clear that hangs before her all the year, shadows of the world appear, that she sees the highway near winding down to Camelot. There the river eddy whirls, and there the surly village churls, and the red cloaks of market girls pass onward from Shalott. Sometimes a troop of damsels glad, an abbot on an ambling pad, sometimes a curly shepherd lad, or long-haired page in crimson clad goes by to towered Camelot. And sometimes through the mirror blue the knights come riding 2 by 2. She hath no loyal knight and true, the Lady of Shalott. But in her web still she delights to weave the mirror's magic sights, for often through the silent nights a funeral with plumes and lights and music went to Camelot. Or when the moon was overhead came 2 young lovers lately wed. I am half sick of shadows, said the Lady of Shalott. A bowshot from her bower eaves he rode between the barley sheaves. The sun came dazzling through the leaves and flamed upon the brazen greaves of bold Sir Lancelot. A red-cross knight forever kneeled to a lady in his shield that sparkled on the yellow field beside remote Shalott. The gemmy bridle glittered free, like to some branch of stars we see, hung in the golden galaxy. The bridle bells rang merrily as he rode down to Camelot. And from his blazoned baldric slung a mighty silver bugle hung, and as he rode his armor rung beside remote Shalott. All in the blue unclouded weather, thick jeweled shone the saddle leather, the helmet and the helmet feather burned like one burning flame together as he rode down to Camelot. As often through the purple night, below the starry clusters bright, some bearded meteor, trailing light, moves over still Shalott. His broad clear brow in sunlight glowed, on burnished hooves his war horse trode, from underneath his helmet flowed his coal-black curls, as on he rode down to Camelot. From the bank and from the river he flashed into the crystal mirror. Tira-lira by the river sang Sir Lancelot. She left the web, she left the loom, she made 3 paces round the room. She saw the water lily bloom, she saw the helmet and the plume. She looked down to Camelot. Out flew the web and floated wide. The mirror cracked from side to side. "The curse has come upon me," cried the Lady of Shalott. In the stormy east wind straining, the pale yellow woods were waning, the broad stream in his banks complaining, heavily the low sky raining over towered Camelot. Down she came and found a boat, beneath a willow left afloat, and round about the prow she wrote, "The Lady of Shalott." And down the river's dim expanse, like some bold seer in a trance, seeing all his own mischance, with glassy countenance did she look to Camelot. And at the closing of the day she loosed the chain, and down she lay. The broad stream bore her far away, the Lady of Shalott. lying robed in snowy white that loosely flew to left and right, the leaves upon her falling light. Through the noises of the night she floated down to Camelot. And as the boat had wound along the willowy hills and fields among, they heard her singing her last song, the Lady of Shalott. Heard a carol, mournful, holy, chanted loudly, chanted lowly, till her blood was frozen slowly, and her eyes were darkened wholly, turned to towered Camelot. For ere she reached upon the tide, the first house by the waterside, singing in her song she died, the Lady of Shalott. Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a gleaming shape she floated by, dead pale between the houses high, silent into Camelot. Out upon the wharfs they came, knight and burgher, lord and dame, and round about the prow they read her name, the Lady of Shalott. Who is this, and what is here? And in the lighted palace near died the sound of royal cheer, and they crossed themselves for fear, all the knights at Camelot. But Lancelot mused a little space. He said, she has a lovely face. God in his mercy lend her grace, the Lady of Shalott. Thank you. Thank you. We all need to listen to poetry sometime. Okay, apologize to your next place and say it's all my fault. Bye-bye.